What's up, Diesel family? Young Diesel here, and today we're diving into something that's going to shake the trucking industry to its core. If you're a driver, an owner-operator, or just someone who cares about keeping America's freight moving, you need to hear this. Because what I'm about to tell you could change everything we know about trucking in America. Before we get into this bombshell, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're building the strongest trucking community on YouTube, and with news like this breaking, you don't want to miss a single update. Also, drop a comment and let me know what state you're driving through right now. I love hearing from drivers all across this great country. Now, let me paint you a picture. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, firing up your rig, and discovering that suddenly there are 100,000 fewer drivers on the road. Not because they retired, not because they found better jobs, but because of a single piece of legislation that just became law. Sounds like a nightmare, right? Well, it might be about to become reality. The HR1 Bill, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill, was signed into law on July 4, 2025. While everyone was celebrating Independence Day, this legislation was quietly changing the game for truckers across America. And what I've uncovered about this bill is going to blow your mind. Here's the thing that's keeping me up at night, and it should be keeping you up too. This bill doesn't just affect trucking. It could completely reshape who gets to drive in this country. We're talking about immigration policies, employment rules, and labor laws that directly impact the men and women who keep America's supply chains moving. Let me break down what's happening here, because this is where it gets scary. The HR1 bill includes several provisions that could literally remove tens of thousands of truck drivers from the road. We're not talking about a gradual decline over years. We're talking about a potential overnight exodus that could make the COVID freight crisis look like a minor hiccup. First up, let's talk about the parole program terminations. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, what does immigration have to do with trucking? Well, here's the reality that might surprise you. A significant portion of America's truck drivers come from immigrant communities. These are hardworking individuals who came here legally through various parole programs, including people from Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, and other countries. These drivers have been filling seats in trucks, delivering your Amazon packages, hauling the food to your grocery stores, and keeping the freight moving while many Americans didn't want to do the job. They've been working legally, paying taxes, and contributing to our economy. But now, with HR1 terminating these parole programs, we could see thousands of these drivers lose their legal status to work. But that's just the beginning. The bill also restricts employment authorization documents, or EADs, for certain groups of immigrants. This is where the numbers get really scary. We're talking about potentially 40,000 to 80,000 drivers who could lose their ability to work legally. That's not a typo, folks. 80,000 drivers. Think about that for a second. In an industry that's already facing massive driver shortages, where companies are desperately trying to recruit new drivers, we're about to potentially lose enough drivers to fill a small city. The American Trucking Association has been saying for years that we need more drivers, not fewer. Yet here we are, staring down the barrel of losing more drivers than we can afford. Now, here's where it gets even more concerning. The bill introduces new asylum application fees and implements strict border enforcement policies. On the surface, you might think, well, that's just about border security. But dig deeper, and you'll see how this affects trucking. Many potential new drivers come from communities near the border. These are people who might have entered the trucking industry, gotten their CDL, and started moving freight. But with expedited removal processes and new barriers to entry, we could see thousands of potential drivers who never even get the chance to start. Let me put this in perspective for you. We're looking at a potential loss of 50,000 to 100,000 drivers. To understand how massive this is, consider this. There are approximately 3.5 million truck drivers in America. Losing 100,000 drivers would be like losing nearly 3% of the entire workforce overnight. In an industry already struggling with retention rates above 90% turnover annually, this could be catastrophic. And here's the kicker that really gets under my skin. While all this is happening, while we're potentially losing drivers left and right, there's another part of this story that shows just how little lawmakers understand about trucking. The HR1 Bill includes a provision that exempts overtime pay from taxes. Sounds great, right? Finally, some relief for the hard-working drivers who put in those long hours. But here's the cruel irony. Truck drivers can't even benefit from this provision because we're already exempt from overtime pay under the Motor Carrier Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. That's right, folks. While other workers get tax-free overtime, truckers don't get overtime pay in the first place. It's like offering a discount on something you can't even buy. This brings us to another battle that's brewing in Washington, and it's one that every driver should be paying attention to. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, OIDA, is pushing for something called the Guaranteeing Overtime for Truckers Act, or the GOT Act. This would finally mandate overtime pay for drivers working more than 40 hours per week. Now, if you're an owner-operator or a company driver putting in 60, 70, or even 80 hours a week, this sounds like a no-brainer, right? Finally, some fair compensation for the long hours we put in. But here's where the industry gets divided, and it's not pretty. The American Trucking Associations, the ATA, is fighting this tooth and nail. They're arguing that overtime pay would disrupt established pay models, harm trucking jobs, and contribute to supply chain issues and inflation. Think about that for a minute. The organization that's supposed to represent the trucking industry is arguing against better pay for the people who actually drive the trucks. This creates a perfect storm scenario that should terrify anyone who cares about the trucking industry. On one hand, we have the HR1 Bill potentially removing 100,000 drivers from the workforce. On the other hand, we have industry organizations fighting against better pay for the drivers who remain. It's like we're being squeezed from both sides. But let's talk about what this really means for you, the driver watching this video. If these predictions come true, if we really do lose 50,000 to 100,000 drivers, the economics of trucking are going to change dramatically. Remember what happened during COVID when driver capacity was tight? Freight rates went through the roof. Some drivers were making more money than they'd ever seen. But here's the thing, that spike in rates came with chaos. Supply chains were disrupted, store shelves were empty, and everyone was scrambling to move freight. If HR1 creates a similar capacity crunch, we could see freight rates spike to those COVID-era highs again. Great for the drivers who are still working, but potentially devastating for the economy as a whole. And let's be real about what this means for different types of drivers. If you're an owner-operator with your own authority, you might benefit from higher rates. But if you're a company driver, you might just see longer hours and more pressure to deliver without necessarily seeing more money in your pocket unless that GOT Act passes. The regional impact of this could be huge too. States along the border, places like Texas, Arizona, California, and New Mexico could be hit especially hard. These are areas where cross-border trade is vital, where many of the affected drivers currently work. If we lose drivers in these regions, it's not just about moving freight within the United States. It's about international trade, about keeping goods flowing between America and Mexico, about maintaining the economic relationships that keep our economy strong. Here's something else that's keeping me up at night. The bill includes massive funding for enforcement. We're talking about $80 billion for interior enforcement, including 10,000 additional ICE officers and 100,000 additional beds. This isn't just about border security anymore. This is about enforcement throughout the country. Truck drivers, especially those from immigrant communities, could find themselves targets of this enforcement even if they're working legally right now. Think about the psychological impact on drivers. Even those who are here legally, who have every right to be driving, might start looking over their shoulders. They might start questioning whether trucking is worth the risk. And when drivers start leaving the industry because they're scared, we all lose. But here's what really gets me fired up about this whole situation. Throughout all of this, throughout all the discussions about immigration and enforcement and policy, there's one group that seems to be forgotten. The actual truck drivers, the men and women who get up every morning, fire up their rigs, and keep America moving. We're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about real people with real families, real bills to pay, and real dreams for their future. These are people who chose trucking, who learned to handle an 80,000-pound vehicle, who deal with traffic and weather and regulations and still get the job done. And now they're caught in the middle of a political battle that could change their lives forever. The timing of all this couldn't be worse. We're already seeing companies struggling to find drivers. We're seeing younger people choosing other careers over trucking. We're seeing an aging workforce with not enough new drivers coming in to replace those who retire. And now we're potentially going to lose even more drivers due to policy changes that have nothing to do with their ability to drive or their commitment to the job. Let me tell you what I think is really going on here. I think we're witnessing a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes the trucking industry work. Politicians and policymakers see trucking as just another industry, just another job category. But those of us who live and breathe this industry know better. We know that trucking is the backbone of America. We know that when trucking stops, America stops. And here's the scariest part of all this. I don't think the people making these decisions understand the consequences. They see immigration policy as separate from economic policy, as separate from transportation policy. But in the real world, in the world where freight needs to move and deliveries need to be made, all of these policies are connected. So what does this mean for you? What does this mean for your career, your business, your future in trucking? Well, that depends on a lot of factors, but here's what I think every driver needs to be thinking about right now. First, if you're already in the industry, if you've got your CDL and you're driving, you might be in a stronger position than you think. If we really do lose 100,000 drivers, the law of supply and demand says that the remaining drivers should be able to command higher wages. But only if we stick together. Only if we demand fair compensation for the work we do. Second, if you're thinking about getting into trucking, this might actually be a good time to jump in. Yes, the industry is facing challenges, but it's also facing opportunities. There's going to be demand for drivers, there's going to be freight to move, and there's going to be money to be made. But here's the thing that worries me most. If we lose 100,000 drivers and freight rates spike, politicians are going to start looking for someone to blame. And guess who's going to be the easy target? That's right, the trucking industry. They're going to say we're price gouging, that we're taking advantage of the situation. They're not going to acknowledge that their policies created the problem in the first place. This is why we need to be organized. This is why we need to be vocal. This is why channels like this one matter. Because if we don't tell our own story, if we don't stand up for our own interests, nobody else is going to do it for us. The trucking industry has always been about independence, about self-reliance, about getting the job done no matter what. But sometimes being independent means working together. Sometimes being self-reliant means standing up for each other. And right now, with everything that's happening, we need to do both. I want to hear from you in the comments. Are you worried about these changes? Have you already seen impacts in your area? Are you an immigrant driver who's concerned about your status? Are you an owner-operator thinking about how this might affect your business? Drop your thoughts below because this conversation is just getting started. And here's something else I want you to think about. The GOT Act, that overtime pay legislation, it's still being debated. Your voice matters on this. Contact your representatives. Let them know that truck drivers deserve fair pay for the hours they work. Don't let the ATA speak for you if you disagree with their position. The future of trucking is being decided right now in boardrooms and legislative chambers by people who might never have been behind the wheel of a truck. But the future of trucking should be decided by truckers. It should be decided by people who understand what it means to drive through a blizzard to deliver medicine to a hospital. It should be decided by people who know what it's like to be away from family for weeks at a time to keep the economy moving. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and stay informed. Share this video with every trucker you know, because knowledge is power, and right now, we need all the power we can get. The HR1 Bill is law. The changes are coming. The question is, how are we going to respond? Are we going to let policymakers decide our future without our input? Or are we going to stand up, speak out, and fight for the industry we love? The clock is ticking, the freight is waiting, and America is counting on us. Let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes next. Keep those wheels turning, keep those loads moving, and keep that diesel spirit alive. This is Young Diesel, and I'll see you on the road. On the